I've seen you. Have you seen you actually? It's been a long time since I've seen you.
It was for your 1 year birthday. Come on. Your
Yeah.
baby turned one.
Baby turned two. Baby turned two, you know that?
Two, sorry, two.
Yeah.
Yeah, you saw me there. You saw me. No, in all seriousness, Vikram, everything's just going pear-shaped down in South Africa, and load shedding is way out of our usual, um, sheds. And at the moment, it's load shedding on 6, which is some places don't have power for 8 hours in the working day. So it's really, really horrendous what's happening.
Things you think things are going to get better? What's the feeling?
I think it will get much worse before it gets better.
But are we in the right direction, making it worse or not?
I think, we'll probably have something like the Arab Spring, because it's too much for the middle class, hardworking taxpayers, and we're now coming to a point where there is a resolute enough is enough, because people are being hit right in their pockets when it comes to revenue, especially if you have food businesses and online, as my practice has morphed completely online since COVID, and 80% of my work comes from the online platform. So I'm often going into another zone to really then connect at a cousin's place or a friend's place to do my work, because we all don't have load shedding at the same time, unless it's and then when the lights come on, we often have stations blowing transformers because of the lack of maintenance. So you have the load shed, and then you have another couple of hours waiting for an electrician to come on site, fix and replace the transformer. So it really isn't fun anymore.
But are we looking at solar power or something like that?
No, Eskom is looking at coal, using that, and there's a whole lot of controversy. Solar power is, most of us are morphing into that. I mean, I've got a what you call not a generator, an inverter, which gives me 6 hours, but it's been depleted because of the playing catch up, So this is why I have to go and find electricity, jack up the cell phones and the computers and so on. But we try and remain optimistic, because, in this country, anything can change overnight. And hopefully the corruption, there is some positive changes in that the president has got more of a, let's say, passion around what he's doing, because there was a reshuffle in the cabinet. Some of his, let's say, not allies, non-allies have been removed. He won the conference going into 2024 election that happened in December. So he's sort of got some power, and he's able to now be his own person. Prior to that, it was very disappointing for us to see him on TV, etc., because you can see this is not a man in control of his of his country and his ministers. And there is some change, but unfortunately, it's too much too late. We go into national elections next year, and I think we're going to end up with a bilateral parliament. The ANC, I'll be horrified if they win an election 100%, like in the majority, because every one of us that we're ANC supporters are now disillusioned with our struggle. We were all activists during apartheid, and I speak for hundreds of us, if not thousands, that are just going to be neutral and not go to voting station next year, because I can't see myself voting for any other party. So I'd rather be indifferent.
So this just tells at least that it's been a long time, and we have to catch up like this, going live on on an event. That's the only way to get Indrani in. So Indrani, thank you very much for being part of the symposium, and of course other events and everything. But the only thing is that we should also put out what we're doing here. Indrani, you have to give me this 10 seconds to put this up. This is what we're doing. Indrani, of course, is from South Africa. So mediation legislation, the how, what, when, where, which, who, why of it, or you can go the other way, whatever order you want to do it on, that's up to you. So Indrani, some little bit about yourself. Not too much time for you because there is a session at 8 in 25 minutes. So maybe,
Okay.
so
I'm
please.
going to pop off, guys. Thank you so
Yep.
much for
Okay.
having
Thank
me.
you.
It's
Thank you,
always a
Elise.
pleasure. And
Yep.
Johnny, very
Yep.
nice to meet you.
Same
And
here. Thank you. All the best. Bye.
bye,
Thank you.
Elise.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.
Yes, Indrani.
Okay, Vikram. So I think what you want me to talk about myself very briefly. Okay. So I'm a full-time mediator, and I do this within the ambits of land disputes, civil and commercial disputes. I also lecture to students within the alternate dispute resolution disciplines at the University of Witwatersrand. And so it's very encouraging that I'm able to impact on young minds and, initiate the mediation mindset at that stage of their respective, they're all postgrads, in order for them to go into their respective practices and become, mediators in their thinking, because it's really about a mindset. And so, in a nutshell, I also train mediators for the commercial facilitative and evaluative model with the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. I'm an ad hoc trainer and coach for them for over a decade now. So I've had a very, very interesting and let's say global experience with them. And so it's really encouraging to see the amount of delegates that are signing up to become accredited mediators. And I then do some work with Mediators Beyond Borders, and that on a global scale as well. So I'm very, very privileged and blessed, because a lot of practitioners in full-time mediation do find very dry seasons in their practices because of the things that we'll talk about in a few minutes to come. The dynamics that underlie, the mediation as a mainstream practice for lawyers, non-legal persons, etc. My background is that I'm trained in both law and psychology, and I sort of married the two, didn't become either. And so my practice is on that sort of space where I've done postgraduate stuff in law and arbitration and so on. But essentially, that's me as such. Thank you, Vikram.
And you can, of course, people can watch Indrani in conversation with a beautiful mind. All you have to do is go to YouTube and search Mediator Vikram and put Indrani's name, and you'll find that episode. So, Indrani, let's go straight to mediation legislation, please.
Good. So within the South African ambit of, let's say, amendments to the, we had an amendment that was made under Rule 41A in March of 2020. And that amendment to legislation pretty much says that any dispute outside the criminal space must be, the parties must show that all remedies for mediation have been exhausted before it is placed into the role of the court schedule. And very disappointingly, there hasn't been much bite to this. It's merely a checklist that the majority of lawyers do. And they do this because obviously it's about fees, and it's about keeping their parties in a determinative mindset, and because the lawyer then has the power to dictate how and where and when that dispute proceeds, particularly in litigation. As we know, it's all about very abrasive and adversarial mindsets. So unfortunately, that has not taken the kind of impact that we wanted to see in terms of legislation. We also have court-annexed mediation in South Africa, but disappointingly, that came into play at least about 8-10 years ago. And that, as far as I am concerned, we had a pilot in Johannesburg and another province in the country, and that failed dismally for many reasons, but no doubt because it was not sufficiently, there wasn't a, let's say, mindset to educate both the clerks of the court as well as other parties in mediation advocacy, in what is mediation. And most people think mediation is something to do with counseling. So there's a great, lack of understanding. And I always say to my delegates in training and my students that knowledge is power, but understanding is everything. When you understand something, you're able to then work yourself into, a place where you gain passion around whatever it is that you're doing. A lot of the lawyers, as much as they see ADR as an alarming drop in revenue, and that's a joke in the marketplace, unfortunately, a lot of them don't understand the principles regarding, the value of mediation and how that turnaround, that expeditious resolution will result in more feet in the door and ultimately an increase in their fees. So because they don't understand this, it becomes the best kept secret. So they see mediation as something that is an enemy for them, the majority of lawyers. They don't see it as a mechanism upon which they can please their clients, most importantly, because you're pulling them out of litigation that's more often than not stuck in the court system for years on end, decades even. And what does that mean to someone whose operational time is about generating income, their business is on profit margins, and now the main stakeholders are locked in a dispute and spending hours and hours in the court system, not to mention the amount of monies that go into the lawyers' pockets, because this just drags on from year to year. And with mediation, you hold control, at least of the timelines. So I often offer free services to lawyers, and I take them through mediation advocacy, which is should you behave in a mediation? And basically, when lawyers go into mediation after reading something for 15 minutes, they feel that they can manage a mediation and they don't understand the actual process. And so it gives mediation a bad rap, bad reputation. People think mediation is something that definitely is only for people who don't have massive disputes. I've mediated disputes in the millions of dollars in terms of the commercial space, and mediations that were stuck in the court system that was able to resolve within the South African landscape of land disputes, which is very, very high intensive black on black conflict, black on white conflict. I've managed to, have breakthroughs and get them to a place from disharmony, high volatile conflict, to a place of mutual respect for the land and coexistence in as harmonious a place as you can coexist on the same piece of land. So I've got, experience to really, really blow the trumpet of the value of mediation and how mediation within the legislation system can work to expedite disputes, help people to get on with whatever it is that they are in, whether it's a land, farming, get on with the farming instead of being locked in disputes, get on with an operational business, commercially speaking. And in civil cases, when you have relationship breakdowns within families, I mean, there's nothing sweeter, nothing more, greater as an accomplishment to see siblings that have been in disrepair in terms of their personal relationships because of money, because of their inheritances, to see them at least accommodate each other to sort of find a middle ground upon which they can both, or if it's a few, really expand their understanding around the underlying needs and interests versus the position of, I deserve this because of that. And so I've seen mindsets changing within that end, but it's very slow to take the flame. And I think this is because lawyers are usually the gatekeepers, and it's a best kept secret. They don't tell their clients about the benefits of mediation because of the underlying dynamic of earning more fees. And again, it's because they don't understand that you can't have your cake and eat it. You've got to make up your mind as a practicing lawyer to say, I'm no longer going to do litigation. I'm now going into the mediation space and I'm giving it 112%, if not more, of my energy, my time, and my application. Because if you're sitting on the fence with this kind of, litigation mediation, you're never able to switch that cap into the value that it will be empowering, it will be enriching, it will be, repairing. So for me, this is something that needs to happen. And I can count on my one hand the number of lawyers that I know who have taken their practice from litigation to mediation.
I think there is this whole concept of the way lawyers should be, but that's why on my website also I put it up what Mahatma Gandhi said. He said, a lawyer, this was, my joy was boundless. I had learned the true practice of law. I had learned to find out the better side of human nature and enter men's hearts. I realized that the true function of a lawyer was to unite parties riven asunder. The lesson was so indelibly burnt into me that a large part of my time during the 20 years of my practice as a lawyer was occupied in bringing about private compromises of hundreds of cases. I lost nothing thereby, not even money, certainly not my soul. So
Powerful. Absolutely.
So I think it's just, look, again, I keep saying it's not that we can blame them. They're also part of a certain society, which I was discussing with Elise before this, that I think the way societies, maybe communities broke up, the individualistic aspect of life, and a lot of materialism coming in. So they're also part of that system. So things have gone into that direction where they feel that's the way they have to operate. But in them, those people who have that mindset, we have to start bringing them in. So that's the important part. But in terms of legislation, Indrani, what you have to look at is that what should legislation look like? One, on a local level, and then on a global level. I won't put any words in there. Just what would it be? Then we'll discuss it after that.
I must just say before I go into that the one encouraging thing for me is that, and I see this in Africa, prior to COVID, I did some work in some African countries in the continent. And a lot of the judge presidents and judges, they have been, they've been mandated to literally have training on what mediation is in terms of their different legislative demands. And so in South Africa, we have judge presidents that are now saying to lawyers, what is this case doing before me? And why is this case here and not being mediated? And they throw them out with costs. So we've had a lot of that within the land reform, the land claims court and the labor courts and so on. But within the civil, commercial, and criminal space, there's very little movement there. So if you ask me, what should legislation be locally and then globally? I think that there needs to be some bite around it. So there needs to be sanctions for frivolous, let's say, matters pushed into the court system. And the kind of amendment that must happen must clearly state that if a matter is brought before a judge and one can see that this matter could have been resoluted long before, then there must be, the sanction must be where it hurts most, and that must be in a person's pocket, where costs must be then directed to be paid over to the offending party, if not both sides. And so I can only see it taking, because the fish rots from the head. So if the attention or knowledge or demands are not placed on the judges to see very clearly that this matter shouldn't be sitting before us, what is it doing here? So even before it goes through all those months and years of litigious, arguing here, cross-examining and so on, a lawyer must be able to pick it up. A magistrate must be able to pick it up there and then and throw it out, and there must be punitive measures placed on it. And I think that can impact into the global space as well, because I've been listening to your guests and I've seen that this is not just an African problem. It's a problem that is as alive and rife as it is right now in the United States and in Britain, which are meant to be the biggest powers that make legislative changes for the world you know, for it to take shape into other dynamics of practice, etc.
Was I think maybe now things have to be looked at differently. Maybe they have not been able to take it into a direction where people do look at what the US is doing and maybe also the UK. But in this case, I don't think they've been able to give it the right direction, because finally, again, that the whole structure, the colonized structure, which is continuing, I think it has to take a break from places where maybe the people's process becomes a people's process or stays a people's process. And legislating from that perspective, I think, needs to be looked at, and which is where I want your thoughts, because I've put out my thoughts quite a bit, but I want to hear your thoughts as to how that legislation should look like. One is, of course, like you said, entry into the court system should not be as easy as it is maybe in some countries. It's maybe some countries is even free to get in. So like I think Brazil, I think that part comes in. So one, that part of it needs to be discussed. Maybe that's another national and maybe a global discussion, that whether that access should be there or not there, how much and for what kind of things should be there. If you have a $10,000 dispute with someone, and this, it's in a way state is funding your dispute or the taxpayer is funding your dispute, I don't think that's the correct thing. People should pay maybe for the cost that it is, and the cost has to be looked at from various factors. So that's another discussion that has to happen. But otherwise, Indrani, what would the legislation look like? And at some point of time, Indrani, you'll have to also not, of course, the court system does come up in the discussion, of course, legislation in relation to that, but legislation in relation to mediation, not connected to the court system, both.
Yeah, you see, we have, as I said earlier when I started speaking, I said knowledge is power, but understanding is everything. And I want to go back to that, because for me, there is a lack of knowledge around the benefits of mediation and what mediation means in the lives of all affected parties. So the colonial mindset is something that has overtaken the thinking person. And so what happens mostly is people fall into that default. This is how things were always done. And so we'll follow, because this is what is the reality in terms of our practices, in terms of our, professions and so on. So I think the system needs to be completely overhauled. And I cannot, to be honest with you, see this happening in my lifetime, because you're having this, it's almost like people's mental abilities are in lockdown when it comes to breaking away from the shackles of the colonial mindset and the practices that have no, why do you even wear the white stuff, the white wigs when you go into court, for God's sake? But we keep doing it as Black people and think nothing of it and don't question the underlying significance of that. And robotically, it's just, perpetuated and constantly becomes from one generation to the next, without us standing up and saying, but hang on, why is this happening? And how can we, in this space that we occupy right now, change it for the better of altering that mindset? Because the moment you go into that kind of attire, entering court, you are endorsing and you are accepting the shackles that colonialism placed upon our minds. Forget the spirit that the damages have occurred in and continue to occur. We are imprisoned within the mindset that because this was done this way for eons and eons, I will continue doing it without questioning and without putting up some kind of a rebellion against the almost the cynical and just absolute nonsensical application of things such as that.
I know. Nonsensical to the extent that someone was also, you can understand what the weather in Delhi is, in India is, various parts, and you have to wear that, of course, robe. Of course, you're wearing your coat, and you have that band, and you're sitting in a courtroom, which of course doesn't have any air conditioning. You're sweating inside, but because the colonial masters have given that to us, and you have to carry that through. It's a big issue. It's a big issue, that part of it. But what again? But Indrani, still the legislation part of it. I'm trying to get through you, but I want to say that it has to be really simple. I want you to say that.
Okay. No, no, absolutely. I mean, at the moment, it's in the lingo where most people will obviously look at it and find it overwhelming. So yes, keep it simple, keep it applicable to the simplest of parties in disputes, whether it's a small or a big dispute, where the understanding is such that there's immediate take on, where the practical application of it is not then contorted into and convoluted into a long, hard journey that goes from A to B, will now go A, D, C to get to B. So this is the current reality that we find ourselves in, because the legislation is very complex and certain things are done thereby as a gateway for them to continue doing the litigation. But if you keep it simple, and it's very clear that if you do this, this will occur, and if you don't do this, this will be the repercussions or the punitive or the sanctions of that. So when it's kept simple, it's clear, and it helps everyone to focus on things without having to do a checklist and say, okay, I'm going to quickly tick this box, and I'll get through the system. So I hope that sort of is on the same navigation as you'd like it to be, because for me it's very complex at the moment. It's designed to frustrate applications, and if it's very simple, then, and lawyers are trained. I know you don't have much of a sort of open mind around accreditation. I believe that there needs to be a regulated application of mediation. Everybody can be mediators, but go and get some training and understanding around the absolute value and benefits in the mainstream of bringing parties into a place of harmony from years and years of litigious battles and no doubt financial losses, and bring them into a mindset of mutual gains, not win and lose, mutual gains. Let's look at how, we walk away from this where both of us are happy. One may be happier than the other, but it's mutual gains and it's self-determined. It's not imposed on you by a third party who's got absolutely no vested interest in your psychology, in your well-being, and so on.
Yeah, I think my only thing, what is coming up in a lot of these discussions, is that now that I think too many vested interests have come into forming legislation. So you have the vested interest of training institutions, you have institutions you have to go to for your mediations in relation to the court system also. This is a model that Italy has promoted, and everyone's talking about the Italian model, not understanding as to the structure that you're creating I don't even know whether it's good for the country with 60 million population, but India is discussing it with we have 1.4 billion people discussing the same model, that every litigation that you have to go through, first you have to go through an institution. So you into the hands of institutions, they are going to form these things. So there will be corruption there.
Yeah,
there will be a lot of issues which are going to come around it. So for me, the purer form of, maybe it's going to take time, but finally having those people out there whom you trust, taking that forward, and that's the way mediation develops. I'll stick to that part. And this aspect of it, I'll keep fighting it out. I'll keep saying that, look, these vested interests are taking into a direction which is not good for mediation. It hasn't happened anywhere. Yeah, I mean, with Elise, I was having that conversation about the US and about the lawyers taking control. So either lawyers are taking control or institutions, and then the certifications through training institutions. We also don't know what that, because I have to also give an alternative. So what I'm creating in the Indrani, which you also have to be part of, is a skill development program where people will have access to the best in the world. And you said they need some training. That word you're using, I'll say skill development. They'll have that. So I'm not saying that I don't have the option. I'm creating that option and saying, look, they need it. They've got from the best in the world. But when it comes to these mock mediations and those kind of things, these are people that I'm identifying who are already doing it. There's communities and schools and colleges and organizations. Those people that user experience is already guaranteed. We don't have to do mock mediations for them to get that. They're doing it. You're picking up those people only. So maybe that's the thought, but Indrani will have to maybe wrap up right now. Sisana is here. Her session starts now. So any last kind of things, any wrapping up comments?
Other than to say that, you know, the work that you're doing has certainly expanded the circle. And it's very encouraging to know that there are, you know, we are in the echo chamber, all of us, because we preach the same language, and we need to take that echo chamber and beyond practitioners like us with our mindset and spread it to people who can see the value. And I like that you say it's skills development. That's more, you know, it twists it completely. Training is now something that is almost mandatory and statutory. So skills development immediately changes it completely as well. So I love that. And thank you for the opportunity, Vikram. As always, it's been a pleasure. And keep up the great work that you're doing on a practical side down there.
Thank you, Rani. And I just feel that we should these sessions should not be the catching up sessions. We should be catching up separately also.